The seed of the woman promised in Genesis, that is the Messiah, the Christ, would also come forth from Abraham's offspring or seed.
So the Abrahamic covenant does a few things. First of all, it is God's decision to save the world. Therefore, it is an everlasting covenant. Therefore, it is unconditional, because it's couched in God's mercy and God's wonderful grace. Of course, it also sets aside the Jewish people as the mediators of this wonderful covenant, and therefore bequeaths to them land as an everlasting possession. They will be the crucible out of which God will bring his redemptive purpose to the world.
It is the unquenchable hostility of Satan towards the fulfillment of God's promise that is at the root of what is often referred to today as anti-Semitism, or more simply, hatred of the Jews. It is because of this satanic opposition towards the purposes of God through his people that God himself would have to curse anyone who stood in the way of that fulfillment. Hence God's pronouncement to Abraham and to his seed, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you.
What we need to find out is, what does it mean when God says, if you curse my children, I'm going to curse you?
The word to bless is the same on both sides of the promise. God says, I will bless those who bless, the same word. But the word for curse is different. And I think this is highly significant, because God says, I will ara those who kalal you. Now the word kalal first is a word that means to mock, to revile, to think lightly of, to scorn. It's not a physical thing, it's an emotional and a mental thing. Whereas the word ara is a violent word.
The first time this word curse, God using it, saying I will curse, is used, is when God cursed Satan for deceiving the first humans.
God says to the serpent, cursed are you above all livestock. And the word there is ara.
You know, cursed are you, and you're going to walk on your belly, you're going to crawl on your belly. Next, he says to Adam, part of your punishment is I'm going to curse the ground. You're going to have to work hard. There's going to be thorns and thistles that come up. A very interesting point on this, that thorns are a sign of sin, or are symbolic of Adam sinning.
That gives us an idea of what God feels when he says the word ara. There's a revulsion, there's a real sense of, I'm going to destroy. And that's what God says, I will ara those who mock Israel. So if you want to put that in colloquial language, you could say, well, God is saying, if anybody just so much as laughs at you as a nation, I will crush them.
I will curse those who despise my people. Uh-oh. Now we're looking at big problems with most of the world. Why does God protect the Jewish people in this way? Why does God protect the seed of Abraham, the seed of Isaac, the seed of Jacob this way? He says, I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you, I will curse. Why? Listen to what he says. And in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So what we have here is God protecting the Jewish people so that through them the Gentiles could be saved. Now obviously this includes Jewish salvation as well. But God's protection has to do with global salvation.
The promise of blessing that the Lord pronounced to Abraham was repeated to his son Isaac. Isaac, in turn, passed it on to Jacob.
Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you.
Behind me is the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron, where Abraham, his wife Sarah, as well as Isaac and Jacob are all buried. Since that pronouncement when the patriarchs were living nearly 4,000 years ago, a remarkable phenomenon has taken place through history. Nations, empires, and even individual people that have blessed their descendants have themselves been blessed. Conversely, those who have come against or cursed God's chosen people or opposed God's purposes for them have either gone into serious decline or finished up in the graveyard of history. And yet the nation of Israel has lived through it all. Is this the outworking of God's word, or is it mere coincidence?
One of the most spectacular events in the long history of the Hebrew people is recorded in the book of Exodus. Because of the supernatural nature of many of the events recorded in the book, the historical authenticity of Exodus has been challenged by many. In what way can archaeology verify the events recorded in the Bible? We asked Dr. James Hoffmeyer, an archaeologist who has worked extensively in Egypt and the northern Sinai Peninsula.
What any archaeologist knows is that we lack any direct archaeological evidence to prove that there was a sojourn of the Hebrews in Egypt and that there was an Exodus. But what the archaeology can do is improve our understanding of the setting, the context, because we have so much background information about Egypt which meshes so beautifully with the Bible. So it actually helps it flesh out, makes it become real. And in the end, it shows that what the Bible is talking about is very authentic. Certainly from a perspective of a historical skeptic, one have to say it's certainly plausible. For the person of faith, it simply confirms what they believed all along.
Because of drought in the Promised Land, the patriarchs of Israel, a total population of 70 people, had moved to Egypt, which at that time was the superpower of the civilized world. In the generations that followed, the Hebrew population swelled to more than 2 million. The Hebrews were enslaved and persecuted by the Egyptians.
The Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field.
Exodus 1:14 explicitly says that there were two areas where the Israelites were pressed into hard labor for the Egyptian crown. One was in the area of agriculture and the other was in the area of brickmaking and building. So we have two areas identified. Now what's interesting is in the New Kingdom period, the New Kingdom is roughly from 1540 BC down to a little after 1200 BC. This is the period of the Exodus, this is the period of the oppression. Scholars differ where in that 200 to 300 year period it fits, but most would say it's somewhere in there. During this period, during the New Kingdom, Egypt was engaged in building its empire, bringing in prisoners of war from Canaan and Syria in the north, and to the south in Nubia and what is today Sudan. And we have actual depictions of these foreigners who are prisoners of war actually making bricks for building projects. And there they are together. You see Sudanese-looking black Africans along with bearded Semites from the West Asian world. And there they are, making bricks for building projects for Pharaoh. So what that shows me is that what the Bible is describing nicely fits what we know was the case of prisoners of war. My theory is that the Hebrews were basically being treated as prisoners of war in the country where they had been previously given permission to live as legal immigrants. They hadn't invaded. They came as legal immigrants with permission of Pharaoh back in the book of Genesis in Joseph's day. But now things had changed and they were oppressed and treated like prisoners of war.
The plight of the Hebrews came to a head when the Lord sent Moses to deliver them from the hand of the Egyptian Pharaoh, who came into direct conflict with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. His country was cursed with 10 plagues, as he refused time and time again to allow the Israelites to go freely back to their promised land and worship the Lord.
One of the problems we have today as moderns, we live in a so-called scientific age where we create a division between natural and supernatural. And so many people who read the Bible would be troubled to say, well, these things are all naturally occurring. You get hail, you get locusts, you get swarms of flies, swarms of frogs. These are naturally occurring phenomena. And so some people will either want to minimize these events, or others say they are such miraculous that they're unbelievable events. In the biblical world, there was no such thing as a scientific worldview over against a supernatural worldview. Everything was a supernatural in its orientation. Everybody believed in deity or deities. Nobody was an atheist in those days, so everything was the hand of deity. So this is why, for instance, after 3 of the plagues, the magicians of Pharaoh could say, look, this is the finger of God. They didn't think it was natural, even though these things do naturally occur. So I think what we have going on here is God the Creator demonstrating to Pharaoh, who, by the way, according to Egyptian dogma and ideology, it was the Pharaoh who was responsible to make the Nile flow. It was a Pharaoh who was responsible for the fertility of the land. It was a Pharaoh who made the sunshine. And yet every one of these things we find the God of Israel, the God who is trying to prove who he is, both to the Egyptians and to the Hebrews, that he is the God, the creator of the earth. And so he is completely making impotent the ideology that Pharaoh is the one who makes all these things happen. So Pharaoh comes out looking very weak, and Jehovah, the God of Israel, comes out looking very strong. And that's the purpose of the Exodus story. By the way, some historians think that this isn't really history, because if this really were history, the historian would tell us who the Pharaoh's name was. You know, something very interesting. Exodus chapter 1, we know who the names of the midwives were, Puah and Shiphrah. So if we know the name of the midwives, surely the author knows the name of the Pharaoh. So I think there's an intentional omission of the Pharaoh, because in chapter 5, verse 1, it was Pharaoh who said, who is the Lord that I should listen to him? And the whole point of the story is, the story of the Exodus is about who is the God of the Exodus, not who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. So that's the focus. It's to demonstrate who the Lord is.
Pharaoh only changed his mind after losing every firstborn male in the land of Egypt. However, Pharaoh made one final attempt to destroy the Hebrews on the shores of the Reed Sea.
The crossing of the sea is mentioned 2 different ways in the Bible. In some places it's simply called Hayam, the sea. In other places, such as in the Song of the Sea, the Song of Moses, Exodus 15, it's called Yam Suf, which means Reed Sea, Sea of Reeds. And by the way, there really is no controversy about the meaning, because when Moses' mother places the basket with Moses in it, she places it among the suf, among the reeds. So there's no disputing the meaning of the word here. So our diversion is with the Greek translation, the Septuagint, that took us in a different direction with Red Sea.
The Hebrews were trapped between Pharaoh's army and the sea. At the Lord's instruction, Moses held forth his staff, and the waters parted. The Hebrews crossed the sea on dry ground. The Egyptians pursued them. Their chariot wheels got bogged. When the Hebrews reached the opposite shore, the waters closed in, and the cream of the Egyptian army was spectacularly destroyed.
Following this spectacular historical deliverance by the Lord,